Hey everyone, how's it going? Just want to do a quick recording. There was an article today that I saw in the Wall Street Journal that talked about uh, investing in infrastructure and some of the issues around how those are forecasted. The article talked about some of the forecasters being maybe a bit too optimistic in their forecast, and that's one of the things that I think we tend to consider quite a bit in the world of infrastructure development, and especially in terms of public infrastructure. Forecasting it is a notoriously a difficult job to do. And a lot of times you're really making a lot of your models are carrying a lot of assumptions um, to try to predict the best way to account for future growth and things of that nature. So it's kind of like the nature of the beast, but I just wanted to give a quick synopsis of what I thought about that particular article. So there was a traffic consultant, Robert Bain, who basically stated in the article that the implication is rather stark. It's wasting resources, right? And so and there's certainly going to be many folks who are going to say these types of projects are spending on infrastructure that's maybe not utilized to 100% of the capacity it's built for in the time frame that was put aside for that to happen. So for example, say we're going to build a new, high-speed rail line, and we expect the commuter ridership to grow by X% per year, say 20% per year, until we hit a peak of, let's say, 50,000 people per day. And 50,000 people per day could mean that we are at 90 or 85, let's say 85% capacity. We have an extra 15% just in case, right? Maybe there's some very high traffic days. Maybe this train line takes, kind of maybe goes to a ballpark or something like that, where at some points in time during peak season, we may actually need to be a bit over capacity, right? This kind of thing. So you kind of maybe over design it a bit. So you may say it's designed for, even though we think we're going to have, steady state ridership of about 50,000, we're going to design this thing for 65,000. I mean, that's kind of a natural, I believe, way of thinking about, designing models and infrastructure. So I think one of the issues maybe in the public discourse may be a bit of a gap between the forecasters and how they're thinking, and city planners and urban planners, or maybe the consultants, the engineers, et cetera, and how they're thinking about these types of models and forecasts versus maybe the public at large, and how they're seeing and thinking about it, and maybe that gap needs to be closed a bit, somehow. So um, back in 2011, I actually wrote a bit about this, and where I looked at some of the did basically an economic survey of energy and environmental projects, and part of that was really looking at something similar as to why, especially along the lines of public projects, of why they may um, um, overrun in cost, or seemingly underperform what their original kind of forecast was. And some of the findings there was that one of the things is just a public project maybe has a bit of a different lens than maybe a private project, right? And some of the private projects that I've been involved with performed a bit differently than the public projects, but there are actual real reasons for why those things tend to happen, right? One of the obvious reasons maybe that kind of sticks out is that a lot of times private entities will not enter certain types of domains. Let's say big, massive infrastructure projects. Think maybe sewage or water, fresh water or even like rail lines because there's just way too much risk involved. So sometimes the government will step in and buy that risk down, right? So that's just part of it, right? Obviously, we have seen maybe if we look project way out into the future, once the government buys a sufficient amount of that risk out of the system, then you can see sometimes the private market kind of takes over. So like I think you're starting to see that in terms of like space exploration, right? Where in the past we've seen mostly it being a government sponsored enterprise, whereas now we see a lot of more so of the private companies getting involved in that. And that's just maybe kind of a natural state. So I think this is one of the things that probably needs to be considered in terms of the difference between, um, public projects and especially the big infrastructure projects and why they tend to behave the way they behave and why the models kind of say that they are going to perform a certain way and do they really meet the intent. And of course the other part of it is all of the infrastructure once it's in place. So once you put that infrastructure in place, there is certainly going to be a maintenance tail for the life of that particular piece of infrastructure, and the maintenance tends to run on maintenance curves, meaning that over time these things will degrade. That's just the natural state of infrastructure. So if you don't have a consistent maintenance plan to keep that piece of infrastructure up, then it's going to degrade. And not only degrade, and it's a curve, so it tends to degrade. If you think about a curve kind of sloping slowly downward, degrades slowly at first, but over time, that level of degrade starts to accelerate, right? The less and less that piece of infrastructure is taken care of. So what then tends to happen is that you have to even put more money into that piece of infrastructure if it wasn't maintained properly to get it back up to speed. And that, if you think about maybe a vehicle or something like that, if you have a car that you're driving and let's just say you're not maintaining it at all, at first the degrade will be slow. You may not even notice it, but over time that thing will start to degrade very quickly. And you'll need even more money to kind of fix it and get it back to where it needs to be, right? So infrastructure projects are the same way. They have the same set of considerations, but just on a mass scale, right? So if your total, let's think about it another way. If you think about it in terms of, let's think about a big company. A big company with a lot of assets in place, a lot of capital assets in place. And let's just say that they have maybe $100 billion worth of assets in place, and that's what they use to produce whatever widgets or whatever service or goods that they're producing. If you look at their balance sheet, you'll see basically every year, two things happen. One, they depreciate that asset, right? So they'll say we have $100 billion of assets in place. This year, we're going to depreciate 10% of that, which will be 100 million dollars, like $100 billion. So 10% of that would be $10 billion. So we're going to depreciate $10 billion of that infrastructure, of that $100 billion that's in place. And then on top of that, what you'll also see if you look at their financial statements, you'll see a kind of a reinvestment where they're actually investing back in. They'll have a capex number, capital expenditure number, that will likely be roughly close to what they're depreciating. So they're depreciating $10 billion a year from their capital asset stock. Then they will be likely reinvesting about about $10 billion back into that capital stock. Now I'm using very big numbers because we're talking about, we talk about public infrastructure, we're talking about, massive numbers. But even on the private side, private businesses, publicly traded businesses, these kind of things, big businesses, they can have $100 million, they can have a few $1 billion worth of infrastructure in place. Think about a hotel chain or a steel company, et cetera. And then we can go a bit smaller scale than that. If you think about, even a small, maybe a smaller business with maybe $1 million of infrastructure in place. Maybe they have, let's just say this a company that has a building that they're renting this building out to folks, right? And it's about $1 million building, a few apartments inside the building, right? They can take about, if it's $1 million building, they can take, let's say, for easy math, about 10% of that, or $100,000 of that every year as appreciation. But what they should also be doing is having a capital spend about the same amount, right? So yeah, there's a big kind of life cycle cost and maintenance tail associated with any kind of a project, any kind of a infrastructure you put in place, whether it's public, private, or otherwise. The public numbers just tend to be very, very, very large, and I think that's why you see a lot of these things rolling around now about these infrastructure bills. Another thing that the article went on to say was talking about how a Federal Transit Administration survey of 27 public transit projects that opened between 7 and 15 found that an average overestimated ridership by about 21% 2 years after opening, right? So once again, we said that yeah, the models are what they are, right? The models are a model is nothing more than a scaled down version of what could be reality, but obviously models don't always capture everything. And maybe the planners, when they put the plan in place, which was probably a few years, maybe many years in public transit anyway, before the construction even started, and by the time the construction ended, the world maybe just changed, right? So like even now you see things going in place, and with COVID and the impact of COVID, what does that mean for infrastructure going forward? I don't think anybody really knows. We could probably say, well, maybe people won't go to work like they used to, or the traffic flows and things of that nature will change, and people won't take trains as much as they used to. But there have been pandemics in the past, right? There may be some in the future. We don't know, but I guess the point is, I don't know if it's really knowable. And the question you have to really ask yourself is does that particular public institution, or that municipality, or that government want to have the capacity online just in case it does need it, right? So that's a question, right? That is a question that these planners have to get at. I mean, maybe you lay the track and get things kind of prepared, but maybe you don't buy the cars, right? The rail cars or something until you need them, or something to that. Maybe there's some kind of a middle ground where you do a portion of it just to make sure you have the infrastructure in place where you can rapidly scale up as needed. But once again, with public transit, obviously it's not maybe as easy as with maybe sometimes private, but there can be some innovation here. Obviously, if we need to be able to vary how much we're carrying, and I believe that the rail lines likely do that. They likely take tracks offline when they don't need them and put them back on when they do need them. Power plants, I believe, do something like this, right? Other kinds of utilities, right? But obviously, there's a limit. There's a certain baseline amount you have to carry in order for the system to even work. And and then above and beyond that, maybe you can add and subtract. The other thing this article went on to say is that there was an improvement over previous years. Projects that opened between 1990 and 2002 overestimated ridership by an average of 77%, right? So this was a massive overestimation. This was many, many years ago. So you think about the planner who planned this for the 90s to 2002, they likely started planning this back in the 80s or 70s. So their mindset at that point in time, and the way the world was back in maybe the 80s, and maybe even I've been on projects where the project I was working on was actually planned 20 years before I was even working on that project, right? So this happens, in some of these big public projects, and the ways in which the world was and the estimations, and then of course what happened in reality was just different. And I don't know, if the question is, can you get a better forecast? Maybe you build, like I said before, that base level of infrastructure that you need to maybe carry the system, and then put more things online as you need it. Or I mean, you can take the city can also take or the municipality of the government can also take the risk of not doing it. But then of course, then when you need it and you don't have it, that might be a bit, that may be not be the most optimal situation, especially for a government, right? Maybe a private business may be able to get away with that kind of thing, but even nowadays in the COVID world, that's not always the case, right? Because we have seen that, with shortages in some of the supply chain issues we've had over the last few years, some of that leaning of capital stock within corporations have kind of come back to bite us a little bit. So now maybe we want to carry a bit more capacity just in case things happen, right? So once again, I mean, I just want to point out that the art of forecasting, there's obviously some science to it, there's some modeling to it, but there's a lot of assumptions that go into modeling and forecasting, and there's a lot of uncertainty built into it. So getting it right is not a easy thing. You can get a distance in a direction and get a rough order of magnitude, and that's likely the best you probably can get in terms of forecasting long-term demand. And you want to get as close as you can, but it's not easy. It's not easy at all. And I think this is one of the reasons why you run into these issues in terms of demand planning and this kind of thing. So just want to make sure that I share that, once again, trying to close the gap a little bit between what is said in the kind of in the media and how they're portraying it versus what is said in terms of the actual forecasters doing the work. It's not necessarily what I think it seems in terms of what the forecasters are doing. I mean, the forecasters are not, these are professional people. They're doing their best, and they're trying to make the best assumptions they can. In most cases, but the models and the assumptions and everything else that goes into it, there are certain limits, and I think that gap between what those limits are and the public's understanding of what forecasting should actually capture may be a bit different, right? And as a matter of fact, another thing we have to think about is, whenever you're forecasting for these very big infrastructure projects, a lot of times there is a public portion where the municipality will go out to the public, and the public will have a chance to comment, they'll have a chance to debate, they'll have a chance to help the forecasters actually hone and refine their estimates, right? So it's not just a siloed thing where the government just moves out and does things. Public does get involved, and they're actively involved, and I've seen this in a number of different projects I've been involved with where the public gets pretty involved. So but then again, the world just does what the world does. It changes, it adjusts, it adapts, things change. And if we were to say, okay, we're going to build for example, high-speed rail over the next 10 years, because it's going to take some time to build that stuff, right? Let's say nationwide, which would be, I think probably a good project to maybe invest in as a country. But you may also see that in 10 years, somebody also developed a teleport machine, right? And now you no longer need the high-speed rail, right? As much. You just never know. So I think, that I just want to make sure that I'm a little bit joking about the teleport machine, but once again, technology does what it does, and you just never know how things are going to unfold in the long run. There is a lot of uncertainty around what is going to happen in the future. Nobody really knows, right? We try to know, but we don't really know. And also the models and, the forecasting models, they have limits, right? They're not a perfect science. All right, so that's all I have for us today. Thanks. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out. All right, bye-bye.